Arizona Territory. Spring of 1879, the sun was barely up when they dragged Rowena North out into the dirt street of Dry Creek. She stood barefoot in her dead husband's shirt, dust curling around her ankles, wrists bound with frayed rope. Her face was bruised from where the sheriff's wife had slapped her the night before for talking back, they said. A widow with no land and unpaid debts had no place in a town like Dry Creek. Not once her husband's gambling caught up to him. A crowd gathered fast. Men with tobacco-stained teeth and women in faded calico. Rowena's heart beat hard in her chest, but her face stayed still. Her two children, Caleb, just turned 10, and Clara, barely 6, clung to each other on the porch of the boarding house, watched over by the old cook who had taken pity on them. By order of Judge Merriweather, the sheriff called out from the wooden platform, "This woman is to be auctioned for the sum of her husband's unpaid debts. She's healthy, can cook, sew, and tend to children. Bidding starts at $20. Rowena didn't cry. She had done that last night, when they told her the children would be sent to an orphanage in Tucson if no one claimed her. A man in a dusty vest shouted, "$25. Another added, "$30. Laughter rose when someone called out, "What's she like in bed?" Rowena stared straight ahead, jaw locked. She would not break. Not in front of them. Then a voice cut through the noise, low, steady, not loud but impossible to ignore. 50. Heads turned. A tall man stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. He wore a woven sash at his waist, a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. Sun dark skin, black braid over one shoulder, calm brown eyes that looked straight at Rowena. The sheriff squinted. "You got the money, stranger?" The man pulled a coin pouch from his belt and dropped it in the sheriff's hand without a word. Rowena stared at him, stunned. She didn't know him. He wasn't from Dry Creek, Navajo by his dress. And he had just bought her. The sheriff cut her ropes and shoved her forward. "She's yours, Navajo. Take her and go before someone changes their mind." The man stepped beside her and nodded once. "My name is Dasan Villegas," he said quietly. "You are safe now." Rowena didn't speak. Her legs felt numb, her stomach sick. But her children, her eyes darted to them. "My children, Caleb and Clara." Dasan turned to the sheriff. "They come too." The sheriff snorted. "That wasn't the deal." Dasan's hand hovered near the knife at his hip. "Make it the deal." A pause. The crowd hushed. The sheriff looked between them and spat. "Fine. Take the whole bunch of you." Rowena bent to gather her children, arms wrapping tight around them. Caleb buried his face in her side. Clara clutched her skirt. She stood slowly, facing Dasan. She didn't know him, but he had saved her. And that meant something. They left Dry Creek before noon. By nightfall, Dasan had led them deep into the Red Rock Canyons north of town. They stopped by a stream near the base of a cedar-dotted ridge. He moved quiet, sure-footed, building a fire, laying out blankets from his pack. Rowena sat stiffly on a log, one arm around Clara, the other brushing Caleb's hair back from his eyes. The children had eaten the bread Dasan gave them, then curled up together beneath a blanket. Now she watched Dasan from the firelight. "You do not have to fear me," he said, crouching near the flames. "I will not harm you." "I do not understand why you did it," she said. He met her eyes. "Because no one else would." She swallowed. "You paid $50. That is more than most men in Dry Creek make in months." "I had it," he said simply. Rowena looked away. "You bought me. I freed you." She wrapped her arms around herself. "And now what? Do you expect me to cook and clean for you? Sleep beside you? Be some kind of wife?" Dasan's eyebrows pulled together, faintly confused. "No, I expect nothing. I will take you to my home. You may stay if you want, or leave when you are ready." She stared at him. "I do not understand." He shrugged lightly. "You do not need to." Rowena looked at the fire, too tired to argue. Her hands still shook a little. But the children were safe. And this man, this stranger, had not asked a single thing in return. When she looked up, he was watching her. Not like the men in town had. Not with hunger or cruelty. Just quiet. Patient. Like he understood things without needing them explained. She did not know what to make of that. The next morning, they rode north on footpaths only Dasan seemed to know. He had 2 horses, one for him, one for the children to share, and Rowena walked beside him, her boots worn thin but her steps steady. "Where are we going?" she asked. "My uncle's land. It is near what the army calls Fort Defiance. But we are far from the soldiers." "Is it safe?" "Yes." Her eyes narrowed. "Are there others like you there?" Dasan glanced at her. "Do you mean Navajo?" She nodded. "Yes. My people live in the canyons and valleys. We raise sheep. We trade. Some do not trust outsiders. But they will not harm you." She hesitated, then asked, "Do you trust me?" Dasan smiled faintly. "You do not carry a knife. You carry children." She looked down at her son and daughter riding ahead, laughing for the first time in days. "I never asked for this," she said. "No one did." It took 3 days to reach the wide valley where Dasan's people lived. They passed through sandstone cliffs and narrow passes, through dry creeks and juniper hills. The children grew used to Dasan's silence, his calm way of answering their endless questions. Caleb asked about horses. Clara picked flowers and gave them to Dasan each morning. By the time they reached a small hogan near the base of a ridge, Rowena no longer walked with suspicion in her eyes. Dasan's uncle welcomed them with a nod. No questions. Cousin brought bread. A neighbor brought wool blankets. Rowena was given her own space in a smaller shelter near Dasan's, close enough to hear the children laugh, but far enough to feel her own breath again. The first night, she stood outside under the stars and looked out over the dark valley. Dasan came to stand beside her. "You could have left us in Dry Creek," she said. "I would not have slept well if I had." She looked up at him. "Why?" He turned toward her. "Because I saw your face." She blinked. "You were not afraid," he said. "You were angry. And you did not break. I knew you would not break." Her throat tightened. No one had said that to her before. She looked at him, really looked at the man who had walked them across miles of open land, who had asked for nothing, who watched her now like someone who saw the truth of her. "I will not leave," she said. Dasan nodded once. "Good." She looked back to the stars, but this time she let herself breathe. And standing beside him, she felt something in her chest begin to settle. Something that felt a little like hope. Rowena woke to the soft hush of morning wind brushing through the juniper. The shelter was still dim, sun not yet cresting the ridge. Clara's small hand clung to the fabric of her skirt, knees tucked against her side. Caleb had taken to sleeping at the far edge of the blanket, his back to the curved wall. They'd found a rhythm in those early days, quiet, careful, unspoken. She stepped outside barefoot, the ground cool beneath her. Dasan sat by the fire pit, coaxing the coals back to life with a carved stick, his shoulders wrapped in a wool blanket patterned in deep reds and black. He didn't turn to look at her, but he didn't need to. "There is water warming," he said. She nodded and moved toward the clay pot he'd set near the stones. The steam was thin, rising like breath. "You have a way of waking without sound," she said. He added a twig to the fire. "You listen like someone who has had to." She poured the water into a basin and knelt. The scent of cedar smoke drifted between them. "I didn't know how much quiet there could be." Dasan reached for a pouch beside him and handed her a sprig of crushed leaves. "Rub this on your hands. It helps with the soreness." She took it, inhaled. "What is it?" "Greasewood. We use it when the cold sets into the joints." Rowena rubbed it between her palms. "You know a great deal." He added another stick to the fire. "When you spend time with the land, you begin to understand what it offers." She watched him, his movements deliberate. "Do you live alone?" "My uncle lives nearby. His sons have their own homes now. I stay here so the sheep have space to graze." "Do you ever feel alone?" Dasan looked up, eyes steady. "Not often." She sat beside him, close enough to feel the heat from the fire. "I used to think I needed noise. People, voices, something happening. But I think I only needed not to be afraid." He stirred the coals gently. "Fear speaks loud, even when no one else is talking." She looked toward the ridge where the sun was beginning to edge over the top. "My husband wasn't cruel, but he was careless. He always thought he'd win the next hand. That he'd find money enough if he just waited one more day." Dasan didn't answer, but his gaze didn't leave her. "I didn't know how to stop him," she said. "You were not the one holding the cards." She took a breath. No, but I was the one left to pay. They sat without speaking for a while. The fire crackled low and the wind carried the scent of sage. A dog barked faintly in the distance. Clara's voice called from inside. Mama. Rowena stood, brushing off her skirt. I'm here. She crossed back to the shelter, and as she lifted the flap, she paused and looked back at Dasan. Thank you, she said. His reply was simple. You are welcome. Later that day, while the children followed Dasan's cousin's goats through the low brush, Rowena walked the edges of the valley. A woman named Nellie approached her with a woven basket in one arm and a spindle in the other. Her dress was deep blue, her silver hair tied in a coil. She offered Rowena a seat on a flat stone and without preamble handed her a length of wool. You will learn to twist it, Nellie said. If you are to stay, your hands should not be still. Rowena took the wool, surprised by the woman's bluntness. I'm not sure I'll be any good at it. Nellie set her spindle spinning. That is not the point. They worked in silence. The wool was soft but stubborn, needing patience. Nellie corrected her when she twisted too tight or not enough. Rowena's fingers cramped, but she didn't stop. My husband was a traitor, Nellie said suddenly. He died before the soldiers took us east. I never saw him again. Rowena looked at her. I'm sorry. The old woman nodded once. We are many who carry grief. It is what makes us strong. That night, Rowena sat near the fire with her children curled in her lap. Dasan returned from checking the sheep, a shallow basket of piñon nuts in hand. Clara asked if the stars fall, he said, setting the basket down. Rowena smiled faintly. What did you tell her? That sometimes they do, but only when no one is looking. She glanced up at him. You're good with them. Dasan sat across from her, legs folded. Children understand truth in ways grown people forget. Rowena looked down at Caleb's sleeping face. He hasn't asked about his father. Dasan didn't speak for a while. Then, when he is ready, he will. Rowena met his gaze. In the firelight, his face was still, the lines around his mouth soft with thought. If I stay, she said slowly, I want to be useful. I don't want to be someone you have to carry. You are already useful, he said. How? You listen when people speak. You notice what others ignore. You care for the ones who matter. That is enough. She felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't known was there. She looked down at her lap, then back to him. I want to learn, she said. Whatever you can teach me. Dasan nodded. Then you will. The fire popped gently. Beyond the ridge, the night stretched wide and silent. Rowena leaned back, the children warm against her, the stars steady overhead. It was not the life she had known, but it was becoming slowly something she could choose. The flock moved slow that morning, grazing across the low rise where the soil turned red with iron and the wind carried the scent of warm stone. Rowena walked behind them, her shawl drawn tight, a woven basket looped over one arm. Dasan walked ahead, a long branch in hand, not to strike but to guide, tapping the ground when the sheep veered too close to a ravine edge. Rowena kept pace, eyes on her footing, then on him. His shoulders shifted easily beneath his cotton shirt, the braid down his back catching sunlight like dark rope. They hadn't spoken much since sunrise, just the rhythm of footsteps, the soft bleating of animals, the occasional whistle from Dasan to redirect the herd. But there was no strain in the quiet, only the kind of stillness that settled between people who'd begun to move in step. She adjusted her basket and asked, How did you learn to read the land like this? Dasan didn't turn, but his voice reached her clearly. My grandfather taught me. Long before the raids, before the soldiers came. He said the land speaks, but most people walk too fast to hear it. Rowena stepped over a low patch of cactus. What does it say to you? That the sheep are lazy today, he said, glancing back. And that you walk like someone who's done it alone for too long. She stopped briefly, then smiled, small and surprised. I suppose I have. They crested a hill, and the valley stretched below them, low brush, sandstone bluffs, and a thin stream threading through cottonwoods. Dasan crouched, examining a hoofprint near the edge of the trail. Cougar passed here, he said. Not long ago. Rowena's knees tensed. Should we turn back? He stood. No, but we'll keep the herd close to the rocks. She moved beside him. Have you ever had to fight one? I'd rather not. But I've seen what they can do. He pointed to a ridge. That's where we'll stop. There's salt in the soil. They graze better there. By midday, the sun pressed down hard enough to draw sweat at the temples. Rowena laid her shawl across a patch of shaded stone and sat, pulling her shoes off to rub her ankles. Dasan handed her his canteen and sat nearby, not touching, but close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. I used to be afraid I'd forget how to be still, she said, taking a sip. I spent so many years running from one worry to the next. Dasan nodded once. Stillness isn't the absence of fear. It's the choice to stay anyway. She handed back the canteen, her fingers brushing his. You speak like someone who's known loss. I have, he said. But not all loss is the same. Rowena waited. He didn't elaborate. She didn't ask. Instead, she said, Clara asked me today if she could help grind corn. I told her she was too small. She cried. Dasan looked toward the herd. Let her try. Even if it takes her all day. Children remember being trusted. She folded her arms around her knees. You were a child once. What did you want to be trusted with? He glanced at her. My own path. My own grief. She didn't speak, but her breath caught softly. I buried my mother before the long walk, he said. My father after. I was 12. Rowena's fingers tightened on her skirt. Who raised you? My uncle's wife. But mostly the earth. And the stories. She leaned forward. What kind of stories? Ones where people survive. Where they carry each other through. Rowena looked down at her hands. I don't know what we're building yet, but I know it feels steadier than anything I've stood on in years. Dasan's voice remained quiet. You don't have to name it yet. That night, after the sheep were penned and the children asleep, Rowena sat near Dasan's fire. She was sewing a torn hem. Clara had caught it on a mesquite limb and her fingers moved slow, deliberate. Dasan added another log to the flames, the glow lighting the lines at the corners of his eyes. I started dreaming again, she said, not looking up. He stirred the coals. What do you see? Nothing clear, just stillness, and light, and the sound of water. He nodded slowly. That's a good dream. She set her sewing down. I think I want to plant something. Corn, maybe, or beans. Something that needs tending. We can clear a patch near the east side. Sun is strong there in the mornings. She met his gaze. You don't ask me what I plan to do next. It's not my place to decide your steps. But you walk beside me. He didn't answer at once. Then, I will, as long as you let me. Rowena's voice came soft. Then don't stop. Dasan's eyes didn't waver. I won't. She reached for the fabric again, but her hand paused. I'm not afraid of the quiet anymore. He watched her a moment, then said, That's how you know it's yours now. The fire burned down slow. Crickets began to sing. The stars overhead turned faintly as the valley settled into night. And between them, the air held something strong and steady like the first roots of something just beginning to grow. The rains came late that year, creeping in on heavy clouds that hugged the mesa and soaked the earth with a slow, steady patience. It turned the hard-packed soil soft underfoot and left the air thick with the scent of damp dust and wild sage. Rowena stood at the edge of the small plot behind the hogan, her skirt hem darkened with mud, fingers sunk into the loosened ground. Tiny green shoots had begun to push through the soil, beans and squash mostly, planted by hand with Dasan's quiet guidance. Each seed tucked with care, each row laid with intention. From the ridge behind her came the low whistle Dasan used when he wanted her attention. She straightened, brushing dirt from her palms, and turned. He was leading a young ewe down the narrow trail, its foreleg bound in cloth. When he reached the flat near the garden, she stepped forward without needing to ask. She caught it in a crevice, he said, kneeling to adjust the wrap. Rowena crouched beside him, examining the limb. Will she walk again? If she stays off it for a while. She rested a hand gently on the ewe's side. I can keep her in the pen near the shelter. Clara won't mind the company. Dasan nodded, then looked past her to the garden rows. You planted more than we spoke of. I had extra seed, she said, brushing a streak of mud from her chin. Felt wrong to leave the ground empty. You've learned the soil, he said. Rowena leaned back on her heels. I've learned to trust it. He didn't answer right away. Then, my uncle says you catch on faster than most. I didn't have the luxury of time, she said. I had to learn to read people the same way. Soil lies less. Dasan's brow lifted slightly. And what do you read in me? Rowena met his gaze. That you listen closely. Sometimes too closely. He stood, brushing off his hands. There is use in silence. Not if it turns into a wall, she said. A gust of wind swept low, rustling the young plants. Dasan looked toward the distant peaks, where the storm clouds had broken just enough to show a stripe of blue. My father was like that, he said. Spoke little, but not from peace. From grief. It took me years to know the difference. Rowena straightened. And what about you? I try not to carry what I don't need, he said. But not everything lets itself be set down. She studied him. Tell me one thing you haven't said aloud before. He looked at her, and for a long moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he said, I used to walk the canyons before dawn. Not for the sheep. For the quiet. It was the only time I didn't feel watched. By who? She asked. By the world, he said. By what it expected of me. Rowena stepped closer, her hands still dirty. You don't need to be anyone else here. Dasan's gaze didn't waver. Neither do you. That evening, Clara sat perched by the low wall of the sheep pen, singing tunelessly to the injured ewe while Caleb helped Dasan sharpen the edge of a hoe blade with a river stone. Rowena sat cross-legged beneath the cottonwood, mending a tear in Caleb's shirt. Nellie approached with a bundle of dyed wool. She handed it to Rowena without introduction and settled beside her, knees creaking as she sat. These are for weaving, the old woman said. You've spun enough to start your own pattern. Rowena laid the wool in her lap. I've never woven. You've done many things you hadn't before, Nellie said. This is only one more. Rowena ran her fingers over the threads. Do you think I belong here? Nellie's eyes narrowed. You already do. The land listens to those who stay. Later, after the children had gone to sleep and the wind had died down, Rowena lingered near the fire outside Dasan's shelter. He was tying a new leather grip to the handle of a tool, his fingers sure, movements slow. I've been thinking, she said. There's a kind of life here that doesn't ask for performance. Dasan didn't look up. It only asks for honesty. She folded her arms. I spent years pretending I was fine, mostly for the children, sometimes for myself. And now, I think I'd rather be true even if it's hard. He set the tool aside. That's the only way something real can grow. Rowena stepped closer, her voice low. I'm not afraid of the quiet between us. Or the work. Or the waiting. Dasan rose, and for the first time he reached for her hand. His fingers were calloused, warm from the fire. You don't have to wait, he said. Her breath caught. Then I won't. He didn't kiss her. Not yet. But he stood so close that the space between them felt like breath, like promise. The fire cracked softly and the stars held still above them. And in that moment everything in her steadied. Not because she'd found safety, but because she'd found something stronger, someone who met her in the quiet and stayed. The first frost came early, dusting the brow of the mesa in pale white before the sun had even risen. Rowena stood behind the hogan, sleeves rolled, shaking the last of the wet soil from a basket of carrots. The plants had yielded thin, but strong enough to see them through the leaner weeks ahead. She wiped her hands on her apron and paused when she heard Dasan's boots crunching across the hardening ground. He carried a folded bundle beneath one arm, wrapped in cotton-dyed deep red. Without speaking, he held it out to her. She took it carefully, unfolding the cloth. Inside lay a woven sash thick, dyed with indigo and saffron, the pattern unfamiliar but striking. I made it when I was 15, he said. My first winter alone. I kept it for when I knew where it belonged. Rowena ran her fingers over the weave. You're giving it to me. He nodded. If you'll wear it. She looked up at him, her throat tight. I will. Dasan stepped closer, his voice low. There's a ceremony if you want it. Not a church one. Not with papers. But one that binds. Rowena held the sash to her chest. Do you mean it? I've meant it since the day you walked beside me and didn't ask to be carried. She reached for his hand. Then I want it. They wed beneath the cottonwood grove near the stream, where the water ran shallow and the stones had warmed from the midday sun. Nellie tied the sash around Rowena's waist while Dasan's cousin brought a clay bowl of water and cedar ash. No vows were spoken. Only silence and the joining of hands and the circle of family that formed without ceremony. Caleb stood beside Dasan, chin high, wearing the leather vest Dasan had stitched for him. Clara clung to Rowena's skirt, her hair braided with yellow flowers she'd picked herself. That night, the fire burned long and low. Rowena sat with her legs folded beneath her, her back leaning against Dasan's chest. His arms wrapped around her middle, steady as breath. "I never thought I'd have this," she said. He pressed his cheek gently to her temple. "You built it." She laced her fingers through his. "So did you." In the weeks that followed, the rhythm of life settled into something deeper. Dasan taught Caleb how to set traps for rabbit, how to read tracks along the riverbed. Clara followed Rowena through the garden rows, asking questions about each plant as she helped with the last of the harvest. Rowena began weaving in the evenings, her loom set near the window where the winter light came in soft and gold. Her first blanket bore the shape of a rising sun, its rays stitched in uneven but earnest lines. "You've changed the room," Dasan said one morning, watching her hang the finished piece across the sleeping mat. Rowena glanced over her shoulder. It needed something to catch the light. He stepped inside, pulled her into him with a quiet certainty. "So did I." They shared the work and the rest, splitting wood, tending the sheep, reading the changes in the sky. There were dry days and long ones, days when Rowena ached from the weight of it all, but never days she wished herself elsewhere. One late afternoon, after the first snow dusted the ridge, Dasan returned from the outcroppings with a carved box he'd made from juniper. Inside were tiny bundles of corn, wrapped in cloth, and a piece of quartz the color of smoke. "For the children," he said, "to remind them what lasts." Rowena lifted the quartz into the light. "What about for us?" He took her hand. "We don't need reminders. We are what lasts." Years passed, quiet and full. Clara grew tall and sure-footed, always with a seed pod in her pocket or a bit of twine she'd twisted herself. Caleb learned to ride with ease, his shoulders broadening, his hands steady when he worked leather alongside Dasan. The valley held them. Winters came and left. Springs brought bloom after bloom, each one different, and none of them taken for granted. Rowena's hair silvered. Dasan's braid lengthened. They still walked together most mornings, tracing the edge of the sheep trail, their hands always finding one another without needing to look. One evening, as dusk fell across the ridges and the fire burned low, Clara rested her head in Rowena's lap. "Did you ever think you'd be happy again?" she asked. Rowena brushed a curl from her daughter's cheek. "I didn't think I'd be anything again. But then I met someone who didn't rescue me. He walked beside me while I rescued myself." Clara smiled softly. "That's the kind of love I want." Rowena looked across the fire at Dasan, who was sharpening a blade with Caleb beside him, both of them laughing quietly at some shared joke. "It's the kind that lasts," she said. And it did. Through every season, every silence, and every shared fire, it endured. Not because it was perfect, but because it was chosen over and over again with the same quiet strength that had carried them from the first. They built a life with no need for declarations. Only action. Only trust. And in the valley where the wind sang low and the stars watched steady, Rowena and Dasan lived out their days in peace. Together. Always.